As somebody once famously said, how do you pay a debt of 36 million? It might as well be a gazillion. Here's what you do. You charge the one you owe with murder, and the debt goes too. Obviously, those were the lyrics from Stacey's iconic song, 36 Million. But of course, it's unlikely that Steve would have got 36 million, but it still would have been a sizable payout, somewhere around about 3 to 5, 7 million. And of course, the embarrassment to Manitowoc County Sheriff's Departments, who were having to give depositions. And of course, ultimately, Teresa disappears 2 weeks before Kosurek and Vogel are due to give their depositions. It doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure out what the dickens was going on in Manitowoc County at that time. And if you ever get a chance to watch A Murder in the Park, the previous Sean Reck documentary, I would definitely recommend it, particularly the bit where see you later, particularly where we see some of the police officers being genuinely irritated and annoyed about being asked about their own personal, finances, and realizing that they are facing big problems in this Anthony Porter civil suit against them. Morning, everybody. Nice to see you all here, particularly from the Southern Hemisphere. When you think about this case, we've looked at over the years loads and loads of other cases that have got parallels, but nothing parallels Stephen Avery. Nothing parallels wrongfully convicted twice. Again, just to remind ourselves that the actual money that was paid to Steve in the end did settle his civil suit for 36 million for 400,000. That money apparently came from Dennis Vogel's insurance. Now, isn't that strange? Because Dennis Vogel never even had to give a deposition, but there was enough in the civil suit to settle that for 400,000, surprisingly similar amount to the 450,000 that Mark Gundrum was supposed to pay him. Make of that what you will. There have been suggestions that the 450,000 was given to Vogel's insurance. They kept a nice 50,000 commission and then used the rest to pay Steve, and everybody was happy about that. Certainly, Steve has yet to receive the 450,000 promised to him by Mark Gundrum. And as I say, it is very strange that it's Dennis Vogel that's having to basically be the one that's taken the rap for this, when the main problem with the civil suit was the fact that Manitowoc Sheriff's Department had sat on that phone call for 8 years, where they knew that they had the wrong guy in prison. And Andy Colburn, the day that Stephen is released, having to write a report. Perhaps that's the longest that Andy Colburn's ever had to taken to write a report, but we know that he's a very, very, very slow writer of reports, and sometimes doesn't write anything at all about anything that he's done. Anyway, let's have a look at this article. Let's pop this up first of all, and let's first of all look at this one, this picture. Let me just make sure, as usual, that everything is working as it should be. I'm not Millbilly with this fancy 3 monitors and stuff. I'm much more old-fashioned. Yeah, that seems to be going well. So let's just enlarge that a bit. So the federal government, the District of Columbia, and 35 states have compensation statutes of some form. The following 15 states do not: Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, Delaware, Georgia, Idaho, Kentucky, New Mexico, North Dakota, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, South Carolina, South Dakota, and Wyoming. So they don't actually have an actual statute, but some do. Let's have a look. What should we look at first of all? Well, I found this, the wrongful conviction of Juan Rivera, an American man who was wrongfully convicted 3 times for the 1992 rape and murder of 11-year-old Holly Staker in Illinois. He was convicted twice on the basis of a confession that he said was coerced. No physical evidence linked him to the crime scene. In 2015, he received $20 million settlement from Lake County, Illinois, for wrongful conviction, and at that time, the largest settlement of its kind in U.S. history. Let's carry on down. DNA testing done in 2004 on semen taken from the crime scene ruled out Rivera as the source, but the prosecution argued that Staker had been sexually active and the semen sample came from her previous consensual sex with another man. Rivera was convicted a 3rd time. His conviction was overturned by the appellate court, which took the unusual step of barring prosecutors from retrying Rivera. He was released from prison after serving 20 years. After his release, Rivera's attorneys asked the courts to order genetic testing on Rivera's shoes. The prosecution had tried to enter these into evidence in 1993. The shoes had Staker's blood on them, but the prosecution withdrew the evidence prior to Rivera's first trial when they learned that the shoes had not been available for sale anywhere in the United States until after the murder. So how on earth does this blood get on his shoes? DNA testing conducted on the shoes in 2014 indicated that the blood belonged to Staker, but it also contained another genetic sample. The DNA in this matched the semen sample from Staker. Rivera's defense team insists that this is proof not only that the blood was planted, but that the real killer's DNA was inadvertently planted as well. The DNA has yet to be matched to an individual, but it has been linked to DNA from the scene of a home invasion and murder in 2000 in Chicago by 3 men. Only 1 man of the 3 has been identified. He was convicted of that crime and is in prison. He claims to have been wrongfully convicted. Wow. Planted blood? Sound familiar? Does to me. It gets even better. Following his exoneration, Rivera sued the city of Waukegan and Lake County. He was awarded $20 million at its time, the largest wrongful conviction settlement in United States history. This amount included, wait for it, $2 million from none other than John Reed Associates of the Reed Technique. Rivera was given 2 polygraph examinations, sound familiar, by a Reed employee. He was reported as exhibiting general deception during the examination and subsequently admitted that he did lie to the test question about his alibi, but continued to deny any involvement in the death of Holly Staker. Over the next several days, he was interrogated by law enforcement. On August 17th, 1992, that's by law enforcement. So that's the murder of Holly Staker. Really don't want to go much further with that. I will pop the link in the description for anybody that wants to read more about that. We have here 5 of the biggest payouts from wrongful convictions. Wrongful convictions lead to a suspect's freedom and a financial relief as well. In many states, payouts in upwards of millions of dollars have been handed out as a result of overturned convictions. In final appeal, Premier Sunday, January 2nd, 7th at 7-6, exonerated football star Brian Banks and former prosecutor Lonnie Coombs take a look at wrongful convictions. Here are 5 of the biggest payouts from recent convictions. Again, we'll pop that in the description for you to have a look at. I have to come down here and click on something. Okay, here we go. California man who spent 39 years in prison gets 21 million for wrongful conviction. A California man who was wrongfully convicted for killing an ex-girlfriend and her son 4 decades ago has reached a 21 million settlement with the city of Simi Valley, officials said. So that's him 39 years later. Craig Coley, he's 71 now, was sentenced to life in prison without parole for the 1978 murder of his former partner, Rhonda Richt, and her 4-year-old son, Donald, at their apartment. He had always maintained his innocence and was pardoned in 2017 by California's then governor, Jerry Brown, based on exculpatory DNA evidence found by investigators. While no amount of money can make up for what happened to Mr. Coley, settling this case is the right thing to do for Mr. Coley and our community, Simi Valley City Manager Eric Levitt said on Saturday in a statement. For the 39 years Coley spent behind bars was the longest prison term ever overturned in California, the statement said. Here's an even bigger one. This is from last year. Jury awards 27 million to Massachusetts man wrongfully convicted of murder, a man who served nearly 3 decades for a murder he didn't commit was awarded 27 million. 1 million for each year he was in prison by a federal jury last month. When the jury foreman read out the award, everybody started crying and stuff like that, said Mark Shand. Shand was convicted in 1987 of a nightclub shooting in Springfield, Massachusetts, that killed a female bystander. In 2013, a judge considered new evidence uncovered by the innocence organization Centurion Ministries and let him go. In 2015, Shand sued the city of Springfield and 4 police officers for violating his civil rights. A judge dismissed the lawsuit against the city. That case is currently awaiting appeal, but allowed the one against the officers, all retired. Are you paying attention to this? Colburn, Lenk, Kasurik, Peterson, all retired. Elmer McMahon, Leonard Scammons, Raymond Muse, and Michael Reed. When the case went to trial, Shand's legal team relied on evidence that the officers used unduly aggressive techniques when identifying him as the suspect. The jury decided that that was worth 1 million for every year spent in prison, an outcome even his lawyers hadn't predicted. What are 27 years of a person's life worth? That is a very interesting philosophical question, said Heather McDevitt, and one of Shan's attorneys. There are experiences that can never be recreated. There is pain and suffering and subjection to violence and isolation and loneliness. For Shand, as I'm sure for Steve very shortly, the verdict is less about the money and more about the vindication. He got no help from the government after he was released. He had to fight the state attorney general's office for a few $100,000 in statutory compensation. $450,000 minus attorney's fees. And even then, no one apologized. Well, that was certainly the case in Steve's case. Nobody has yet apologized to him. Okie dokie. Again, I'll leave you the link to that. Next, and the final article to look at. What do states owe people who are wrongfully convicted? Floyd Bledsoe Center, after walking out of the Oskaloosa, Kansas courthouse, a free man in December 2015, after new evidence showed he was wrongfully convicted of murder in 2000. Many states, including Kansas, are trying to figure out what people like Bledsoe are owed for the time they spent behind bars. And Dr. Silkman, if you're there in the chat, as I believe you are, you'll remember there's a couple of paragraphs in Blind Injustice where, having set up the Ohio Innocence Project, one of the prosecutors had phoned him up and objected to the fact that, why are you calling it an innocence project? There aren't any innocent people locked up. Well, if that's the case, if innocent people aren't locked up, why have state statutes that specify how much should be paid to people wrongfully convicted? As we saw, 35 states have statutes in place. And I believe, I'm pretty sure Kansas. No, it's not on that list. That's fine. Okay. So Kansas is one of the ones. Okay, let's carry on down there. In April 2000, 23-year-old Floyd Bledsoe sat in a Oskaloosa, Kansas courtroom awaiting the verdict in his first-degree murder trial in the death of his 14-year-old sister-in-law, Zetta Camille Hoffman. Now this is a very interesting case. Throughout the trial, he maintained his innocence, but the jury entered the courtroom and declared him guilty. Bit too zealous there. Right, okay, sorry about that. In fact, let's just see if I can make it a bit bigger. Yes. Yeah, that's better. The old eyesight isn't as good as it used to be. But the jury entered the courtroom and declared him guilty. Bledsoe was sentenced to life in prison plus 16 years. Does that mean, like, when he dies there, they keep him there for a further 16 years? This is just crazy. But anyway, but doubts about his involvement in the murder lingered. The crime scene yielded little physical evidence, and Bledsoe's brother, Tom, 25, had originally confessed to the murder before recanting and pinning the crime on Floyd. Not a very nice brother, letting somebody else take the blame. After years of fruitless court challenges, Bledsoe was vindicated in a gut-wrenching twist. In 2015, Tom Bledsoe, the brother of what's his name again? Floyd. Yeah. Tom Bledsoe, brother of Floyd, confessed to the murder in a suicide note before asphyxiating himself. Within a month, a judge vacated Floyd Bledsoe's conviction and he was released from prison. The day of his release, Bledsoe recalls, was a mixture of celebration and mourning. Before I was locked up, I had 40 acres, livestock, a wife and kids, he said. When I was released, I had nothing. I lost my family, my job, my reputation, everything. Floyd found little support as he adjusted to life outside of prison, including from the state that locked him up for more than 15 years. A bill before the Kansas legislature would make up for part of that by making him eligible for $80,000 for each year he spent behind bars. Quite a disparity there, isn't there, between getting the $1 million for every year to $80,000 for each year. But of course, I think we're talking about the difference between what the state legislate to pay out and what can be won in a civil suit. A steady increase in exonerations in recent years, often a result of new DNA testing capability, has prompted lawmakers in states like Kansas to consider legislation that guarantees compensation for those who are wrongfully convicted and imprisoned. And in the 32 states that have compensation laws, some lawmakers have sought to increase the amount of compensation exonerated individuals would receive, expand the eligibility for compensation, or streamline the process for getting it. It's only just, I presume now, that states provide compensation to people who are wrongfully convicted and imprisoned, advocates for the wrongfully convicted say. When an innocent person is deprived of liberty because of a wrongful conviction, regardless of fault, the government has a responsibility to do all it can to foster that person's re-entry in order to help restore some sense of justice, said Maddie Delone, Executive Director of the Innocence Project, a non-profit legal organization that specializes in wrongful conviction cases. Fair compensation is part of that. According to the National Registry of Exonerations, 2,000 wrongfully convicted individuals have been exonerated for state and federal crimes since 1989. In 2016, there were 116 exonerations nationwide, the most since the registry was established nearly 30 years ago. In 2004, Congress passed the Justice for All Act with bipartisan support. The law guarantees individuals exonerated of federal crimes $50,000 for every year spent in prison and $100,000 for every year if it was spent on death row. From state to state, however, those who are exonerated are not guaranteed the same rights or compensation after a conviction is overturned. It really matters where you're convicted, said Amal Sinha, state policy advocate at the Innocence Project. In Texas, a state known for its tough-on-crime posture, the exonerated are paid $80,000 for every year spent in prison and are eligible for monthly annuity payments after release. The state's generous compensation law has added up over time. In the last 25 years, Texas has paid over $93 million to wrongful convicted individuals. Well, the figure estimated that Steve will be claiming will make that pale. Over 100 million is what Steve will be asking in compensation. I'm talking about Wisconsin. Wisconsin, on the other hand, pays $5,000 for every year spent in prison, capped at a maximum of $25,000. Now, of course, we hear Mark Gundrum say that, don't we? And he scoffs at that and says that should be $25,000 per year. Hence the $450,000 that he was suggesting to pay to Stephen. And all I can say, Mark, is that I know that your daughter Bernadette watches this channel because she's passed comment on a previous video and fairly pointed out that, look, people were duped by Ken Kratz and his ridiculous story. Obviously, you were one of them because you actually said on television that whilst you want to give somebody the benefit of the doubt, it's impossible to do. But Mark Gundrum, where are you now? You are one of the judges in the Court of Appeals District 2. You have the opportunity now to make sure, and I think you are, I think you're one of these persons that wants to make sure that this case of Stephen Avery's is handled properly. You've got the chance to take back that crass statement that you made, that whilst you want to give somebody the benefit of the doubt, in Steve's case, it was impossible to do. A lot of people have said that, haven't they? And now look at them. They've all ended up with egg on their face. Anyway, I was under the impression that the Avery bill did away with this capping at 25,000. It would appear not, unless the person writing this article has maybe simply watched Making a Murderer and has gone with what they've heard Mark Gundrum say. Anyway, carrying on. Wisconsin, on the other hand, capped at 5,000, maximum of 25,000. As I say, Mark, you were lining up a check for 450,000. I think, as I say, it's going to cost Wisconsin over 100 million to compensate Steve because of the fact that he's been wrongfully convicted twice. Some states offer in-kind benefits in addition to monetary compensation. Vermont, for example, provides health care coverage for 10 years after an exonerated individual is released from prison. In states without compensation laws like Kansas, those who are exonerated typically have to file a lawsuit to get compensation or convince legislators to pass a special appropriation to pay them. Lawsuits can be time-consuming, costly, and challenging to win. And winning compensation from a legislator isn't guaranteed. In Kansas, for example, a wrongfully convicted person currently must go to the legislator's special claims against the state committee and plead for compensation. How much people deserve for the time they lost behind bars is in dispute. It was in Indiana this year. Greg Steuerwald's bill would compensate individuals with $25,000 for every year of wrongful incarceration, but Greg Porter thinks they should receive $35,000 for every year of imprisonment. Now, this is interesting. Both bills would award compensation only to people whose crimes were vacated through DNA analysis. The Attorney General would be in charge of processing claims for wrongful conviction compensation, and neither bill would apply retroactively, but both bills appear dead for the year. Francis Lee Watson, founder of the Wrongful Conviction Clinic at the Indiana University McKinney School of Law, said she hopes legislators will continue to push for compensation. Convictions are still being vacated and people are still being exonerated in Indiana, but we don't have a compensation law, she said. Another sticking point is trying to pass compensation laws is overcoming lawmakers' general faith in the criminal legal system, or convincing them that innocent people can be convicted. In nearby Michigan, Governor Rick Snyder signed a bill in December that pays $50,000 for each year of wrongful imprisonment and provides re-entry services after release. But the bill's sponsor, Steve Bider, first introduced it in 2004. I think legislators had a hard time wrapping their heads around the fact that someone could spend so much time behind bars and not have done something wrong, Bider said of his struggle to pass the bill. I had to reintroduce the legislation again and again. Which brings us back to, Mark Gods's attorney and people that got in touch with him and said, wrongful conviction? Nobody's ever convicted wrongfully. All right. Well, it's the problem is growing, of course, because we're realizing more and more and more about these cases, which are so similar. As I say, for me, the bottom line is that Steve's case is going to be the one that really does blow the lid off things. It really is going to be a bombshell to Wisconsin. Anyway, I'm going to crack on. I've got work to do, so I'm going to pop all these articles into the link, and you can have a read through them at your leisure, at your pleasure. I'm going to say cheerio. We'll crack on probably tomorrow with more of the emails between Zellner and Tom Fallon. Thank you all for joining, and we will see you all again soon. Bye for now.